It's time for our Newsmakers segment, where we look at some of the issues of the week. And joining us today are Scott Farlow, who's the president of the Young Liberals in New South Wales and consultant with Hill and Knowlton. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Jane.
And Sarah Madison returns. She's the research director of the Indigenous Policy and Dialogue Research Unit at the University of New South Wales. Thanks so much for coming in. Well, we can't go past the week's big event, the federal budget, and the response from the opposition. Let's first hear a few views.
Well, this is a tough budget. We said it would be, and it is. We're delivering what we promised, the return to surplus back in the black in 2012-13. And that has required the making of tough choices. We've had to work through, make cuts in order to get into surplus and to prioritise spending on the things that really matter for Australia now and our future.
We've done everything that has been expected of us whenever it's been expected of us, and we went to the election with $50 billion worth of savings that was going to produce an $11 billion improvement in the budget bottom line and a $30 billion improvement in the overall debt position. So in good time before the next election, Carl, we will have a consolidated list of spending and savings, and people will know exactly how much the fiscal position will be improved under the coalition.
Tony Abbott there, and before that Julia Gillard. It was supposed to be a tough one, but Scott Farlow, do you think this has proven that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer can manage this country fiscally in a responsible way?
Well, Jane, I think that for all the hype about a tough budget, and there was a lot of tough talk, there was no tough action in the budget. The biggest cut came from a dental program of $3.3 billion. What you're seeing from this budget is a 13% increase in revenue. How they've improved the budget position is by taking more money from the Australian populace rather than actually making any severe cuts.
Sarah Madison, what about the quality of the actual speeches and what was said around the budget?
Well, I don't think either budget speech had a lot going for it. I think that Wayne Swan presented what is a fairly careful and cautious budget. There's little in it to excite anyone, and I think that the quality of his speech reflected that lack of excitement. Tony Abbott's speech, I thought, was a lot of hyperbole and hot air. It sounded more like a campaign speech than a budget reply speech. I think that was a missed opportunity for the coalition to actually set out some ways in which they would change the fiscal situation in the country.
Scott Farlow, you're a young Liberal. Why did Tony Abbott squander that opportunity, if you like?
I don't know if it was necessarily squandering an opportunity. I think Tony was definitely reaching out to the people of Australia and saying that this government is an illegitimate government and it is time to go to another election.
But why didn't he address the budget?
Well, Tony did address the budget, and he addressed one of the things that the government wouldn't address in the budget, and that's the carbon tax. You've got a budget which doesn't address the biggest revenue measure that the government is going to unleash on Australia over the next couple of months.
The carbon tax is not going to be coming in for the next financial year, so why should Julia Gillard address it just now?
Well, when you're looking at forward estimates in a budget and the forward estimates period, you should be addressing what is going to be one of your large drivers of revenue for a government. And this government just continues to try and put that under the carpet and not address the issues that really are going to affect Australia in the future.
Although they have said that they expect the carbon tax to be revenue neutral in its first iteration, that the offsets that they put in place will compensate for the revenue that they bring in. So even in a forward estimate sense, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to be focusing on that at this time. I think the government had other priorities, not exciting priorities, but, some solid priorities in there. I welcome the mental health announcement. I think the new punitive approach to people on disability pensions is appalling. It's a mixed bag, but I think it is a careful and thought-through budget that reflects something about this government, whether it's what we want or not.
OK, well, the government announced also this week the population strategy, but without any population targets. Let's first hear another set of views on that.
We would support a population growth rate which independently has been verified as sustainable. The problem is no one can tell you what that is categorically. There was a report issued by the Department of Immigration and Citizenship which showed that, at least in terms of meeting per capita GDP growth requirements, 160,000 to 210,000 was arranged.
There are natural caps that can come in from infrastructure limits. For example, there are some areas, particularly in regional Australia, where the urban water supply effectively limits the level of growth. And those infrastructure issues do provide different levels of limit.
Tony Burke there. Well, I think a lot of people were surprised by the strategy. What were your views about it? Sarah?
Well, it seems a bit of a nothing kind of a policy, and in terms of population, it seems to have far more to say about regional employment than it does actually about a long-term population strategy for the country.
Why do you think the government took that tack of encouraging more people to move to regional areas?
Well, I think it is linked to the budget. The budget was certainly focused on employment creation. They recognise that there's going to be a long-term skills shortage, particularly in some areas. But at the same time, it seems a very unjoined-up kind of a policy. Why were these measures not just the focus in the budget? Why a separate policy release 3 days later? It doesn't make a lot of sense to anyone. I think people are scratching their heads and wondering at the timing of the policy announcement.
Scott Follow, I wonder, Tony Burke has said that migration will address the skills shortage. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, look, definitely. There needs to be increased migration to address some of those skills shortages in Australia over the next few years, because we just do not have the capabilities of training to be able to address that immediately. But back to your point about why does this population strategy move to regional Australia? Well, it's political, effectively. There is currently debate in the cities about the cities being overpopulated in Australia. Most of the population concerns come from inner urban and metropolitan constituencies. You have the regions crying out for more people. You've got Bob Katter calling for 30 to 50,000 people up in his neck of the woods. You really do have a demand in regional Australia, and it is all designed at politics.
Okay, well, finally, Sarah Madison's book is due out later this month. It's about White Australia taking responsibility for the impact of colonisation on Aboriginal Australians. Firstly, Sarah, why did you write about this, and why do we need to address so-called collective guilt?
Well, it's my argument in the book based on research of a lot of political psychology, really, from around the world, that looks at why it is that in Australia we continue to be stuck in a cycle of making ineffective policy for Aboriginal people rather than working with them and enabling them to take better control of their lives. And my argument is that underlying that policy ineffectiveness is a collective guilt, our inability to look at some of the worst aspects of our history and our focus on the more celebratory aspects of that history gets in the way of an honest engagement with Aboriginal people. And as long as we stay stuck in that relationship, we're not going to see any improvement in Aboriginal people's lives.
Scott Follow, what do you think of that premise?
Oh, look, I think that there is no doubt that we need to do more to address Indigenous disadvantage, and that's something that I think that most Australians can agree on. In terms of how we address that, I think that our approach must be forward-looking, and we can't necessarily look back to the past and dwell on those issues. We need to be quite aggressive in moving forward. I hate using that term, but aggressive in moving to the future and looking at where we go in improving the quality of life for Indigenous Australians.
And generations of policymakers have said exactly the same thing with absolutely no effect. It is time that we revisited an honest assessment of our history, the wrongs that have been done, the intergenerational damage that continues to occur in Aboriginal communities because of colonisation, and to address that in a meaningful way.
All right, well, Sarah Madison, Scott Follow, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but many thanks for coming in this morning.